to everyone who's joining us. Our panel today is Tariffs, Transition and Tensions, the Future of Decarbonization in India and Beyond. And we are honored to be joined by an exceptionally distinguished group of speakers. We're waiting for Julian Popov to join in, and we'll do the introductions once he comes in. Welcome, Dr. Aruna Sharma. She's the former Secretary of the Ministry of Steel in the Government of India. Mr. Ajay Srivastava, founder of the Global Trade Research Initiative and a former senior trade official in India's Commerce Ministry. And Dr. Bentley Allen, who is Associate Professor and Co-Director of the Net Zero Industrial Policy Lab at Johns Hopkins University. I'm Archana Chaudhary, Associate Director at Climate Trends, and I'll be moderating our session today. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for making the time. Hello, Julian. Good to see you. Mr. Julian Popov is the former Bulgarian Minister of Environment and Senior Fellow at Strategic Perspectives. Welcome. We're holding today's session at a very pivotal moment, and we're at a weird place, frankly speaking, in global trade, where the revival and escalation of tariffs by the US targeted at exports. We've seen Indian exports have been heavily targeted. These tariffs are reshaping global trade, and nations like India are navigating deepening climate commitments, industrial growth, and energy security challenges while navigating the trade and tariff confusions. From Europe's evolving carbon border rules to China's strategic recalibrations, all the tectonic shifts in trade, industry, and climate policy are shifting really fast. And the way forward for India, and indeed for the broader global South, will be defined by our collective ability to respond to what is happening and the overlapping pressures while we keep our ambition for development and decarbonization. We're privileged to be able to listen to those who have shaped and implemented policy at the highest level. And our goal today is to unpack how some of these global trade trends that are intersecting with domestic realities and to identify the opportunities and the constraints that they are creating, and hopefully to explore what collaboration and leadership means in this next phase for India and its partners. A few quick housekeeping points before we go in. This is a 75-minute session. We'll start with opening remarks of 4 to 5 minutes each from our speakers to set the stage, after which we will have a moderated discussion, and we'll bring on some of the urgent questions that are facing trade today. We will then turn to the audience for a Q&A, so please feel free to type your questions into the chat anytime. If you'd like to direct a question to a specific speaker, please mention their name, and we will try to address as many as possible. With that, let's begin. I will go first to Julian. Julian, I'd like to start with you because as someone who is deeply involved in European climate and energy policy, from an EU perspective, we've seen Trump's tariffs shaking, that they've just shaken trade stability. Combined with CBAM and Europe's own green industrial agenda, what room do you see for EU-India cooperation and strengthening of decarbonization while our continued dependence on China is still in play?
Thank you, Archana. And thank you for organizing this very interesting and timely discussion. I mean, we are in a situation, this is a very trivial statement now of uncertainty and changes, and the most characteristic for these changes is that we don't know what exactly will happen. Usually you can have a guess. Now it's difficult to have guesses just because Trump's policies are very erratic, very unpredictable, and it's quite difficult to understand what is behind them and whether there is anything or just this strange behavior which is typical for him. One thing that American tariffs and the behavior of Trump did for Europe is it shook up Europe, and Europe started thinking a little bit more how to be independent, more independent strategically, especially in relations to defense. I mean, this is obviously very important because of the Ukrainian war, which is threatening Europe as a whole, but also trade is very much linked to that. Europe started looking for possible allies. And there is no more obvious, for me personally, I have to say, more obvious ally for Europe than India. I mean, I've been saying that for probably more than 10 years that we are not engaging enough with India, the biggest democracy in the world, country that in many ways could be quite close in aspirations, but also in relationship with the competition with China. And now there is a awakening in Europe in that direction. A couple of months ago, almost the entire European Commission visited India. It was a very, very important visit. Unfortunately, we heard very little about that visit. And I hope that behind the scenes there have been arrangements, there have been plans to go further in deeper trade, strategic relationship, especially in the field of clean tech investments, because clean tech now is shaping as probably the main competition, global competition ground. And we have to be honest, we're losing to China in many, many areas, in solar and wind, in batteries, electric cars, HVDC grids, and many other technologies. So we have to cooperate very strongly, and also look for opportunities to cooperate with entities in the US which are not under the direct control of the president. Finally, I would like to say that there might be some interesting thing to watch. So, for instance, the what Trump is threatening to impose secondary sanctions on trading with Russian oil, whether that will affect India and how that will affect India. But my feeling is that India is, and Europe and probably the rest of the world, I would say, is moving very, very fast towards a full transition of industry and energy sector. And all the rhetoric of Trump will not change that. Last time when Trump was president, he announced a very brutal war to all green policies in favor of coal and revival of coal. And guess what? For his mandate, coal demand in US declined probably around 25%. Now he's saying that he will ban all renewable energy. 2025 in the US is expected to install 30% more wind and solar than in 2024. So we have to make a very clear distinctions between the very aggressive rhetoric, but what is actually happening in the ground. And these are two very different things which are making me a little bit more optimistic than some of my colleagues.
Thank you. That is indeed an interesting perspective to look at. And we'll come back to some of the points that you've made. If I can go now to Dr. Aruna Sharma. Ma'am, Trump's new tariffs, along with, if we were to believe the news that is trickling in linking trade with strategic requests in which are linked to security, which are almost dictating terms to countries in terms of who they can have foreign relations with. These are kind of changing our India's global calculus. How should now India balance these trade realignments and energy security without losing momentum of our climate-friendly industrial policies, and what kind of risks and opportunities do you see in the situation at the moment?
All right. First of all, yes, I compliment you to have these timely discussions when the world is back on the drawing table, rework their policies, their trades, their trade preferences, and how they were approaching it. Last time, in the last tenure, when Trump was sort of garbaging the climate concerns, India did not budge. It continued with defining the emission norms, which locally one has to move to get the stamping for the green. Similarly, the textile exports, where it was going, it tried to become more and more green, and that became its USP. Its coal dependence also, while they were working, it slowly, very slowly, is on a tapering thing. But yes, coal for 50 years India will need. So many of the mining, starting from mining to usage of coal, the processing has been done, which is going to have lesser harm on the climate. So this is where India's stand is very clear, that it is not going to compromise as far as the climate commitment is concerned, of lowering down, of damaging the environment or damaging the climate control. None of its policies of late has come which has diluted their concerns about it just because of the kind of trade upheavals that is happening. Yes, US imposing 50% of the tariff is a cause of concern, because with US, it was not a trade deficit for India. It was a positive thing for India. It is going to hit in a very big way, especially in the textile sector. But rest of the sectors, they are looking for alternate markets. And when it was 25%, it was not of much concern, because the competitive countries for that particular good were also having a similar kind of tariff being imposed by US. So now this making a 50% thing will definitely make it more expensive to the consumer there. And how much it will be absorbed by the importers in United States is something is to be seen. But what is more interesting is that it is opening up of market for the rest of the world, where there is definitely an opportunity to develop the alternate markets. One expansion is, as Mr. Julian has very rightly said, in the year, where there is a scope of huge absorption, because as far as the climate concerns are concerned, they are on the same page. And in spite of CBAM and other things which were coming in, India was slowly moving to some agreements, how those norms can be set, and it was still under the discussion processes. So with this kind of an arrangement and the technology edge, which now China has over the US, and the technical talent which India has, Europe or United Kingdom can become a hub, and it can move out from Seattle and other places if worked upon carefully. And when the European delegation came to India, this was one of the point of discussion on the table. So all environment-friendly businesses will be the focus, and these are the countries, or these are the so the South Asia, especially India as the lead, the China and Europe, they are all sort of not diluting their concerns on the climate. They are continuing with it, and they are looking for a separate market as far as the export part is concerned. But as far as the domestic consumption is concerned, it is going to be a transition to a more climate-friendly production methods, the process methods, and end product methods. The recent quality control order, which has come in steel also, with more and more BIS stamping on it. It is all targeting to have a better arrangements for a better quality products which you are going to have. Textile is working very strongly on it. Electronic goods manufacturing, even though Apple may be trying to do more at home, but the cost at which India is able to give the end product, that edge will continue. While it has shifted out from China to India to a very big extent because of the labor cost advantage which India is having even over and above China. Definitely, it can't be overlooked by these brands which are thinking to continue with their arrangements and that kind of an exports. So it will be more an inflation to the end consumer in the United States. And it will be more expensive depending on how much their importer is able to absorb this 50% of tariff. Definitely, the exporters from India is not going to absorb it. That calculation has been very, very clear that it is not possible to absorb 50% of the total cost by which it is going. And that is the kind of arrangement one is looking at. So when you look at it, these tariffs, India's domestic market being huge, is not going to immediately affect, but there are some sectors where it will have an adverse impact. And it will make sense to gradually look at the alternate markets instead of having lots of eggs in the basket of the United States. And that is what the change one is consciously moving ahead. And that is where it will take all the policies are heading at, because you had FTP arrangements with the European nations and you had other arrangements with European nations. So that is all going to open up the trades regulations which is going to happen in these.
So we are going to look at India charting a different path, a new path.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Thank you for that. But having said that, this is going to create some immediate and long-term risks at the same time. And Mr. Srivastava, maybe you could come in and talk a little bit, tell us a little bit more about how you're seeing the short and long-term risks for India's exports.
Thanks, Archana. Thanks for inviting me. So, when we discovered that US is going to impose 50% tariffs on our exports starting from August 27, so everybody first reaction was, let's search for the alternate markets. So which are the alternate markets? We thought, okay, Europe is the biggest market. Then suddenly we realized from January 1, Europe will start closing. That CBAM will come into effect from January 1, 2026. So our steel, aluminium, and many other products will start getting hit through carbon tax in Europe. Now it has, and the products which link this EU's environment policies and the US tariff goals, they are again, they both started with steel and aluminium, the most polluting, most CO2 emitting products, which initially developed countries like US or the Europe, they tried to offshore the production in countries like China, but they want to produce everything now in their own countries, all these black products. And that's why trade war of US started with these things. And EU CBAM, of course, they talk about noble intentions, but they want to make these products on their own. And so in India, two issues are there. We are working on the decarbonization goals, but now with Trump almost abandoning this green agenda, no other country is coming forward except the European Union. In fact, inside the European also, you must have seen many fights have started where exporters are saying, give us subsidies, we can't do all these things, we'll be losing all these orders. So in India, two strands are there. Now Indian exporters, large exporters of steel and aluminum, they are wondering, now if I am making, say, partially green steel or aluminum, it will cost me double, if not 50% to 2 times the cost will be there. Do I need to have 2 production lines? One for exporting to Europe, which will then I don't have to pay the carbon tax there, and one for the rest of the world, because the steel is steel. The quality remains the same. It's the production process that's green. Rest of the world doesn't care it's green or not green. So that's the basic problem. Some large manufacturers may go in for such things, but others will simply opt out or will pay this CBAM tax in initial few years, then will become outpriced and will go out of the market. I was looking at the data of India's exports to Europe of steel and aluminum. In financial year 2025, the exports were down by 24% over the last year. Just now, the Europe have just barely started to collect the data. They not started taking tax and the exports are down by 25%. So big impact we expect from next year. So one big hit from the US side coming, another will soon be coming from the Europe side. Another imminent issue of Indian concern is the European FTA. It's an advanced stage we learn from the media, but how it will happen that Indian goods will pay carbon tax in European market and European products will enter tariff-free in India, that will sound very, very unimaginative. So it will be creating, I mean, for me, it's a white elephant, which is not being discussed enough, and that will be creating a problem. So CBAM, these are the core issues. And if I come back to the trade war and its impact, this again, the trade war one started in March 2018 with steel and aluminum tariffs on all countries by Mr. Trump. And what happened? If we compare the data between 2017 and 23, we see America's trade deficit increased by $760 billion. And China's trade surplus increased, China's exports increased by $1 trillion. So China was a very clear winner, where Chinese products indirectly going to US via Mexico, via Vietnam, and many other countries. So it was a clear winner. This time the trade war started with China, where Mr. Trump imposed very high tariffs, more than 249%, I mean, extreme high, average 145%. But when China relented by stopping supplies of rare earths and many other materials, then there was a 90-day truce. And he said he brought down the tariffs from 145% to just 30% on China. Now imagine, trade war started between US and China because of large trade deficit. Now today, for whatever circumstances, India will be paying 50% tariffs over and above MFN. China will be paying just 30%. So India is paying much higher tariffs than China, for which the trade war started. And we did some broad calculations. Now, 28% of our exports of, say, petroleum products, pharmaceuticals, and electronics like smartphones, they are, today's date, they are tariff exempt. So there should be no impact on them. But the remaining 72% of $87 billion of goods, they will take major hit. They will take major hit. Most of these are labor-intensive items, where the exports will be down from 70 to 90% the next 1 year. Initial decline will be less because orders have been committed, and sometimes you cannot shift the factories immediately. But after 6 months, there will be almost free fall, and not easy options are there. Let's see how it goes. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a stark picture that you painted, and a fairly honest one. So if I can then move to Bentley, and we will come back to some of the points that you are raising, sir. Dr. Bentley, your research has actually highlighted a lot of this interplay between tariffs and supply chains and clean energy industrial policy. Given where we are today right now, can you talk to us a little bit about whether this is a temporary rebalancing, or are you looking at a real breakup of deep global ties, and what does this decoupling then mean for clean energy supply chains and decarbonization?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here with such a distinguished group. So I think geopolitically and diplomatically, we're in a really interesting but incredibly difficult situation for India. On the one hand, India was really tightening its ties with the US precisely because of these long-term structural challenges in its relationship with China. Of course, it has long-standing relationships with China through BRICS and through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And of course, China welcomed the tensions between the U.S. and India, and made sure to send an early invitation to Prime Minister Modi for the upcoming Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And so it seems like China's an easy winner from this. But again, there are long-term territorial, technological, and economic challenges in the relationship between India and China that don't make it easy for India to just pivot. So India, in part, was so all in on its relationship with the United States across the Biden and Trump administrations, in part because over the long run, it certainly saw itself as being a more natural ally with the United States than with China. And so this is a real blow in that regard. And for me, that suggests that the answer to your question is there's not going to be a complete decoupling, and there's no real place for India to go. The hope still has to be that negotiations proceeding, like leading up to the August 27th deadline for the 50% tariffs, will be successful, and that there's room for conversation with the United States. When we have seen the Trump administration back down with other countries, it has tended to be in economies that have a larger percentage of American imports than India. So India is ninth on the list compared to the EU and Mexico and Canada and Japan, which are higher on the list. So the impact of those tariffs on U.S. industry and on U.S. consumers would be higher, and therefore there was a stronger incentive for the Trump administration to back down. With India, there's a smaller amount here. But surely India is shocked by what has happened. And I think what that means is that India's push for economic sovereignty and for more independence and more independent sources of geopolitical leverage in a dangerous world has to increase, and that the Indian government will have to double down on trying to find sources of independent leverage and independent sovereignty. And the energy transition is one of those sources, right? Continuing to import large amounts of fossil fuels, whether it's from India or Russia or anybody else, is obviously creating geopolitical liabilities. And therefore, the government's push for energy security, which has been ongoing now for almost a decade, I think is going to be doubled down on. And in part, that will mean more imports of clean technology from China in order to help do the deployment. It'll mean doubling down on India's industrial strategy for solar and for other clean energy technologies. And it will mean, and also India's strategy for biofuels and other things that help reduce fossil fuel imports. And so I think the acceleration of the energy transition in India goes along with creating independence in a dangerous world. And I expect that's the pattern that we will see, given that India does not have real strong diplomatic options globally.
Thank you. Again, an honest picture. And some things that we will come back to, especially on the clean energy supply chains. I'd request our listeners to please, if they have any questions, to put them in the box while we go into our second round of our discussion. But meanwhile, if I could come back to you, Julian, and if you could, now that we've seen and talked through the kind of situation that we are in globally. Looking for solutions is something that obviously is at the top of the mind for everybody. At such times, do you see something like the European Green Deal and the regional supply chain strategies that EU is following? Do you see something of that kind of a template that others can follow in terms of balancing their geoeconomic security? Bentley just spoke about looking for clean energy supply chains that are reliable. But do you think that is a template that can be followed, especially in Europe? Do you see that happening also? And how does India fit into the picture there then?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I very much agree that the US behavior is a shock for India. And one problem is that it's quite sudden shock when adjustment will take much longer time. So probably in immediate terms, I mean, one thing is the negotiations in the hope that they will have some more positive result, but if not, there will be a hard and difficult period. But in a, not longer, but medium term, one thing that the whole concept of the Green Deal and the different documents and strategies of and regulations of the Green Deal open as an opportunity is increase in trade with clean industrial products. I mean, everything that actually supports the net zero agenda. It is very clear for Europe that Europe is not backing on the green agenda. There were quite a lot of discussions and opinions that now Trump came, so the Green Deal is over. No, there isn't such thing. The ambition for net zero remains. It's very likely that Europe will adopt also 90% target reduction of greenhouse gases by 2040, which means that in the next 5-10 years, we will see acceleration of adoption of green technologies. So that opens and it expands existing market in all green technologies. I mean, batteries, cars, solar panels, anything to do with wind, all technologies linked to energy efficiency, which we very often ignore somehow, but they're also very important, and it's a huge market. So everything to do with heating and cooling and so on and so on. One area that, because we often mention CBAM as a serious barrier, so one way to deal with the CBAM, in my view, is development of zero carbon or low carbon industrial zones. I mean, this is strategically, in my view, a very positive thing, because it is not just Europe that is going into the net zero direction. The whole world is going, but at a different pace. So creating net zero industrial zones would be a very good way to avoid CBAM, but also to position the industry for trade with any country that has, or any company that has net zero targets. So, and I think India has a very good opportunity to develop this concept, whether you will call it green industrial zone or net zero industrial zones or something else. But basically, these are clusters where which are supplying with green energy, but also provide all the administration, legal, administrative, and logistical support for trade in zero carbon products. So that I see as one of the opportunities.
That does sound like a plausible one of the opportunities, yes. But maybe I'll ask Aruna ma'am to come in here and talk about it in terms of how feasible investing in something like this is for India at the moment, and where do you see that in terms of green manufacturing? How can we meet our export ambitions? Is there scope for something like that?
Want me to address?
Sorry?
You want me to address this?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So as Mr. Ajay Srivastav has rightly flagged it, all the exporters have now a separate plant, which is even entering into scope 2 for the emissions. So it's not restricting to scope 1. So you have scrap-based DRI non-coal-based route, which is manufacturing steel for exports, which will be sort of enabling it to avoid the extra tax to export it to the European countries. So this kind of an advantage is already happening. And our exports, total exports are only 8% of total what we manufacture. So for that, what is going to European Union where CBAM is there? So all exports of this 8% has been taken care of, so that it will be of literally nearing 0% of emissions, right? So it will be an excellent example for this. But having said that, even the more polluting manufacturing, already the ministry has decided the norm of 1.9 of emissions, and slowly each of the brand is trying to reach at least 2.02 to 2.03 of emissions. And that process and that kind of an investment and that kind of a use of technology has already started. So you will have scope 2, because now what they have done is they have installed non-renewable energies to feed these plants. So in the sense, you have the entire value chain, which will be taking care of it and which will ensure that you have a kind of steel which will enable stamping for European Union and all the exports which go in the steel. But having said that, in other sectors where exports are there, this USP of being green, it will be welcome in rest of the country who are sticking to the commitment to the climate change. And US has been completely isolated in this. So it's only one voice which is saying, okay, who cares? Damn for it. And if you look at the tariffs which the US is putting to different countries, is so erratic. And besides erratic, they are not consistent. One evening it is something, next evening it is something, third evening it is sort of cut down by half. So it's a very funny kind of an arrangement which is having. So definitely a little wait and watch is there when discussions are on. Like China being tough, achieve that because of the dependence of the imports US has on the China, on not just the fast moving consumer goods, but also important electronic investments that is going there. India has got the advantage in the brain power, the soft power. So using that leverage of the soft power, definitely for all the big brand names that is there in the soft power of the IT sector, definitely this is something as a arm twisting or as a leverage point that can be used for deciding on the tariff rates that is happening. All the threats which were coming on giving the entry visas to the technically qualified people have gone for 6, and easily the technically qualified people are able to enter in the US workforce. So it has not been able to impact it what it was talked of at some stage. Then if you look at, I mentioned about textiles before, because that is the major hit. But the textile which is exported from India is having more green labeling vis-a-vis from any other countries. So that USP is going to withstand them, where an organic manufacture right from the seed to cotton procurement, etc., is being sort of imbibed into the value chain. So once you look at it, yes, the tariff which has been put by the US will be temporarily losing the business from the US, but alternatives have to be worked out by these industries, where it will not have an adverse impact of the extra tax for able to manufacture, which will be fitting their norms. So that 8% is being taken care of, and that is how it is going to proceed when we are moving ahead with it. Similarly, when we look at the new markets, India itself will increase its consumption if it continues to invest on the infrastructure, the pace at which they should do. So it is going to happen that way. So if you look at it, yes, there will be a little disruption, but then India is also a huge consumer market itself. So domestic consumption, following the climate commitments, not affecting the environment norms, will be a fallback for a considerable extent till all these ripples are sort of softened and one comes back to a settled stage. So one is expecting US to come up with a more committed kind of arrangements where they will have more stability when you are moving ahead with it. So that is what one is looking forward for this. So not something to get very upset about it, but yes, you have to go back to drawing board and constantly react to it. You can't be be complacent about it.
Well said. Going back to the drawing board, easier said than done. And I see that there is a question to which we will come back, but maybe I'd like Mr. Srivastava to talk a little bit about what this going back to the drawing board can really mean. What are you seeing in terms of data-wise also? India being able to do this going back to the drawing board and uh, you know what kind of short term, in the short term at least, till the ripples settle, as ma'am says. What do you see as the next steps?
Uh, Before answering that, I was working on developing some scenarios which could unfold and what are their probabilities. So for example, one scenario is, as we know, the current situation continues. We are having 50% tariffs. So 72% of our exports will be down by 70 to 90%, total annihilation of labor intensive exports. Next situation is that suppose we heard that India earned about 12, $13 billion. India saved about 12 to $13 billion by buying Russian oil. Suppose we forget about all those things, we just focus on numbers. If India thinks of stopping buying Russian oil and US agrees to cut tariffs from 50% to 25%, then our exports will not be down by $50 billion, but maybe down by, say, $25 billion. So the extra cost of oil and extra earnings on exports, we will be at least 15 billion on the positive side. So Indian government can think of this, but the problem is that US is not certain. Maybe Russian oil is just a red herring for punishing India, because China is a bigger buyer of Russian oil than India, and China has not been touched by US. So if India thinks in this direction, that suppose we stop buying Russian oil, will you bring the tariff down on 25%? And even if you bring down tariff tomorrow, you will not increase on some other pretext. India is a BRICS member, so put some more tariffs on this. So those uncertainties will remain, but it is a distinct scenario. And if everything is certain, India will save something. India will earn more through exports earnings than by losing buying the Russian oil. Third is, Mr. Trump has again on Truth Socials for the past 3 days, I think 3 statements have come. He says US is going great guns through these tariffs. Everybody is complying. Only hurdle that may come is through the stupid courts. They may outlaw the tariffs. So there is a fear. We have seen that US Court of International Trade has struck down the tariffs. Now it's in the appeals court and they are being delayed. There is some small chance, small probability, 5%, that whatever lower court said may prevail. Why not? Upper court have not set aside the decision. They only just delayed the decision making. So that is one. If that happens, then trade war will end. Possibility is very less, but of course that's a distinct scenario. So many other scenarios similarly are there. Suppose we are able to diversify, as we are saying, going back to the drawing board. Even if trade war is there, trade war is not there, I am very certain that even without a trade war, with the current level of India's product basket, this is the limit of our export growth. Our merchandise exports are about $440 billion this fiscal. And we can go to 500, 550 without trade wars. With trade wars, of course, it will come down substantially. So if we want to grow substantially in the export business, on the merchandise export business, we have to, as Aruna ma'am rightly said, we have to go back to the drawing board. And what does that mean? That means we have to focus on making top quality products. It's easier said than done, but we only have been talking about these things. There is no real work on ground. Most of the top industries, they export intermediates or crude chemicals or crude textile. They are not into finished products, unlike the industries in China. We have to go back and we have to see that our product profile improves. Then, of course, all sort of things are there, like why deep manufacturing cannot happen in India. You know, uh, because our cost of making things is very high, because power is not uninterrupted, because capital costs are high, because technology problem. So these fundamental reforms, we have delayed them. We are talking, but no action is there. So unless action is there on these things, things will not move. We will be reacting to the global situations, international situations. So this is the time for renewal. I always think trade policy is far less important than manufacturing policy, production policy. And there has been very little discussion. Whatever discussion is there, I call it helicopter level discussion. You very high level experts will talk, you cut the size of the farms, and all these things are there, but we have to go to the trenches and then do it. And if we do it, we find that most of the sectors, including steel, there are many self-inflicted wounds where we are trying to protect some of the large monopolies and hurting thousands and thousands of small firms. This is happening in steel, this is happening in chemicals, this is happening in textiles. So I say, okay, competitiveness is next. First, stop hurting yourself. I mean, these discussions can go unending. I'll stop here.
But all very important points that you've raised. Setting your house in order first, ensuring that you are taking care of your small and medium-sized industries and not hurting yourself. All of which is very important to know. And also raises the question then is, I think I'd like Bentley, if you could come in and weigh in on the discussion so far, because now we've talked about short and long term options that India has, but it's not just India, right? This is a play that is happening where there's EU involved, there's China involved, there's India involved, there's Russia, US. How are you seeing this? In terms of real opportunities as well as vulnerabilities, we are going to continue because you've done a lot of work on resilient clean energy supply chains that you and Tim Sahai have analyzed. Can you talk us, how does this change the matrix basically for everyone?
Yeah, I think that I mean, every country is trying to do two things, right? Every country is trying to, in the near term, secure a deal with the Trump administration that lowers the effective tariff rate. But at the same time, every country is also trying to diversify their trade, right? And the second is easier said than done. And over the long term, that will isolate the US economy to a certain degree. And what it means is that countries like India can and should pursue these opportunities with other countries, right? Such as the EU and China and everything like that. But in the long term, India does have some real opportunities in playing a continued role and an expansive role in global clean energy supply chains, right? So the European Union, for example, is looking for another source of solar panels that is not China. Countries in Latin America are interested in more sources of electronics goods and the electronic supply chain. And to get to Julian's point earlier about energy efficiency technologies, I mean, one of the things that India imports a lot of right now from China is in the HVAC supply chain. And actually, there's some really great GTRI data from AJ and his team on re-exports from the Indian from the guts of the Indian economy, especially in HVAC supply chain, which feeds into the heat pump supply chain, which Europe is obviously expanding rapidly. So I think India has opportunities, especially in electronics, in biofuels, in solar panels. That solar panel industry builds on its strength in electronics. If you want to think about economies as having certain kind of industrial capabilities, one of the industrial capabilities that India is building up in a strong way is the electronics capability, which feeds into its solar value chain. it's weaker in the kind of machineries and components that would go into HVAC and heating and efficiency technologies. But that's an area where it could potentially play a significant role if it could come up with a coherent industrial strategy that really learned from the Chinese on these points, and if it was able to secure some strong FDI and then do technology transfer from those foreign direct investments. But right now, it's not extremely competitive in that. It looks like it's going to play a stronger role, or it could play a stronger role in things like fertilizer, green steel. These are areas where India has a real opportunity, has some strong cost advantages, has a lot of experience. And as we talked about, I think the CBAM actually is an opportunity for a lot of Indian firms to actually invest in a new technology that will potentially reduce costs in the steel sector over the long term. And if India can learn today about how to do those technologies, then it will have an advantage in the future. So I do think of the CBAM as being an opportunity for Indian firms to get out ahead of other countries that could potentially be trying to deploy these new technologies. And India has something that other countries don't have, which is a really strong entrepreneurial and innovation class that I think can support a completely new industry in steel. And there's some really interesting startups and some really interesting innovation happening in the steel space in India that I think is excellent. There's been a lot of talk about batteries. I'm a little bit less bullish on India's capacity in batteries. I just think this is a really mature industry that's dominated by China. And the industrial base for batteries, if you think about it, is really about chemicals and critical minerals, and those are not historic strengths for the Indian economy. Those industrial capabilities are not as strong, say, as the developing electronics industry, which then feeds into the solar value chain, or the agricultural economy, which feeds into biofuels, or the steel, which feeds into green steel. So I tend to think of countries as having certain industrial capabilities and that they should direct their industrial strategy efforts in the areas of those industrial capabilities. And our research has kind of shown that these are the areas where India has the strongest opportunities to compete and play a role in the creation of these global value chains globally. So as Julian said, the EU-India relationship is critical, and I think solar panels and steel can both play a really important role in developing and strengthening that trade relationship. But India is also going to need to look elsewhere in Asia, and it's going to need a really focused strategy in order to play a role in the Japanese and the South Korean economies, because the areas where Japan and Korea are strong are areas where India would like to maybe come in. And China was able to do that. China was able to come into those places and find a strong role in South Korean and Japanese value chains, but that's going to take a really focused strategy, something that we haven't actually seen from Indian industrial strategy yet.
Thank you. That's a point that I might come back to you, Ma'am, and Ajay sir, to you also, on precisely looking at our other neighbor in our neighborhood and what options we have there. But if I can come to Julian, because there's a question that has been waiting for him. Both you and Bentley have talked about the EU-India possibilities. But one of the questions that we have is whether the creation of the green industrial zones that you have talked about, is there any scope for their funding to come from elsewhere, or do you think that India needs to be self-reliant on these?
Yes, I guess this is a concept that could attract interest in European Commission, but also European Investment Bank, and also other development banks, European development banks, German and others. But I wouldn't rely so much on sort of grant type funding, but banking funding, loans could attract this interest, especially if they're linked somehow with European demand arrangements, which is a difficult issue. Strategically, it's easy. It's very easy to say, oh, Europe will need a lot of green steel. It's much more difficult when it says, okay, who exactly will buy it? But there are companies that have very clear targets for full decarbonization of their supply chains in the automotive industry, in other industries, you can work with them. These companies are not only European companies. I mean, American companies that are operating in Europe, and not only in Europe, in other places, as Alan quite rightly said. I mean, look at elsewhere in other markets, because companies like, I don't know what is the latest in the mind of Amazon, but for instance, Amazon and various other companies have targets for net zero targets for 2040. So they are potential customers. So I don't know, to give a short answer, I would look into this customers and clients for green steel, green energy, and so on, and then on that basis, potential demand develop the concept of net zero industrial areas. By the way, I think coal regions offer very, very good opportunity for development of this type of clusters, which is also an interesting thing to discuss.
Could you elaborate a little bit on it? Take a couple minutes.
Well, coal is declining. I mean, whatever we say, it is declining, and also it is a very polluting industry, especially when we talk about lignite. It takes very large areas of land, which areas of land are very good for development, large-scale solar power plants. So usually coal areas have also other assets. I mean, what I call assets-based transition. A coal region has very good assets for transitioning into clean industries, because they have land, they have engineering capabilities, and people, workforce. They also very often have very strong grid connections, electricity grid connections, and other infrastructure. So that the decline on one hand and these assets on the other hand, in combination, offer a good opportunity for development of such zones.
Thank you. But I mean, understandably, well, what you're saying is that there are places where to make it work, but grants is not something, the age-old climate debate on climate finance, grants is not something that is always feasible. Maybe loans and maybe tying up with customers, buyers, industries could be an option.
These are investment intensive transition. I mean, you can rely on grants for, I don't know, concept development, bringing expertise, feasibility studies, and so on. But for the actual investment, maybe public banks like EIB could step in. But you need real investors.
Need real investors. That's a fair point. But the point that Bentley made earlier is an interesting one, and I think I'd like to ask for Aruna, I'm yours, and Ajay, so your indulgence on this. How feasible do you see India going back and then looking at other decisions in trade that it has made so far? Because India stayed away from RCEP, stayed away from other regional trade agreements. Do you see some sort of a change there? Do you think there's any this at all, or do you think that that's not something that India should be looking at all going back? I mean, what is your view on this? And do you see the government moving? How do you see the government moving vis-a-vis our Asia partners as well as our neighborhood?
Yeah, if you look at it, recently there have been a lot of talks of FTA with sufficient reservations. So there were many sectors which were not part of the FTA agreements, right? Where there is a concern for India that India's production will not be competitive. We allow the FTA, and India deals with dual problem that we have to generate employment to the young population that you have. So there cannot be any permanent kind of an arrangement or an agreement which is going to directly hit these sectors. To give you an example, dairy has been completely left out of it. So like that, you have sectoral approach when you're talking about the various opening of the trade relations at different places. But what is very, very important is we have to relook at it that why our manufacturing is expensive. Yeah, in fact, like if you look at any of the manufacturing within the factory, we are the most competitive in the world. The moment it steps out, so your cost of credit, your cost of logistics is exorbitant. So there is a need, you cannot have a profit making at each spot of the value chain. It is very important that how you move ahead with it, and that needs a reconsideration, which will make India manufacturing very competitive, and it can hit back even in spite of this 50% of tariff to even countries like US. So that is very, very important when we are going ahead with it. What is most important at this stage is to become a leader in quality manufacturing. Capability is there, the industries are there. Self goals, definitely we hit. Many times we do somersaults, we don't allow innovations. So all that has to be taken care of. I mean, the time has come to talk bluntly about it and list them out and point them out, and corrective measures are taken about it. We can then be very competitive, very sort of effective into its manufacture and able to compete with all the exports we are doing. On the issue of, the whole argument India was putting for the CBAM was to share the tax for investments in the countries which is exporting or from where the Europe is importing to sort of reduce down the carbon footprints. But that still is in discussion stage. But CBAM imposition, my hunch is the dates will keep on getting postponed. It's not going to come what is we have been talked about, because the problems are at both the ends. The problems are at both ends. The procedural problems are there, how to calculate problems are there. So still a lot of things needs to be ironed out. So that breather is to be used to set the house straight and then sort of start moving towards it. We have to now ensure to focus more and more on the manufacturing part of it. It has to be the focus, rightly has been said by my co-panelists. And we have to manufacture the top quality goods at the competent prices. That's where the secret lies. Capability is there, everything is there. We have to just sort of put patches on the irritants that has been self-created, which will trigger it off in each of the sectors in which we are talking about today. So to say in a single sentence, US is not going to upset the apple cart of India. Definitely no. But it's an opportunity to sort of correct our pain points so that you become much better manufacturer and better quality products, both for the domestic market as well as for the exports when we move ahead.
Thank you. Ajay sir, do you have anything to add? Especially on our neighborhood and whether we will reconsider or how we will recalibrate. So you're on mute, I think.
Aruna ma'am has said everything. I'll just add a few points. We have left RCEP. For people like me, it is a closed chapter now, and we don't see any merit in reconsidering that. I'm very clear about that. Why? RCEP without India was a 15-member group, and we had FTAs with everyone except China and New Zealand, everyone else. With China, we have a small preferential trade agreement, and New Zealand, we started negotiating. So RCEP would not have got us more value, and Now you see the decision. How correct was our decision? Now, after the RCEP, the trade deficit of all ASEAN countries, including and Japan and Korea, has increased with China. Chinese exports is going more, imports are coming less from these countries. So we should have expected deficit to increase. Already our deficit is $100 billion. It would have increased tremendously. Second is RCEP. One of the reasons India not joining RCEP was, we negotiated with China that India will be cutting tariffs on a longer time frame, 10 years to 15 years. But certain rules of origin and other rules were such, they were short-circuiting that arrangement. The Chinese goods could have come to India next day at zero tariffs via some other countries. Because RCEP was being developed as one area without internal restrictions on movement. So that was not acceptable. We thought we need 10 to 15 years time, and that was being short-circuited. So I don't see any logic right now. RCEP means our FTA with China only. And China, we have so much trade deficit, I don't think we want to work on that. But without this, we have FTAs with everyone. We completed the Eastern Circle. We initially we had FTAs with, say, our neighbors, SAARC countries, then ASEAN, Japan, Korea, now with Australia. Everyone is covered. When East is completed, we move towards West. So we completed with the UAE, Mauritius, UK, and now EFTA also is completed. We are in advanced stage with EU. With US, we have signed that IPF. Now everybody has forgot about how much pressure US put on India during the signing of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So India FTA is, I think, Indian government considers is as the top export promotion tool, and we have lined up FTAs with almost everyone except China.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. And I think we've reached a place in our conversation also where we can start, I think, winding up our discussion. But this is not a very easy, there are no easy solutions to whatever we are facing as a globally and collectively as nations. But if I can request each one of you all to maybe take 3-4 minutes for your closing remarks in terms of how you see things playing out. And Julian, again, I'll go by the same order. If we can start with you, Julian, in terms of where you see hope and where you see bigger risks, if I may say so, for green trade as well as for global trade, and what needs to be watched out for. If each one of you all could talk a bit about that.
Thank you. I mean, as I think everybody said, we are in a situation of uncertainty, unpredictability, and for the time being, we just have to adjust to that. So certainly the European Green Deal, but also the commitment of other countries, India especially, but many other markets offer an opportunity for expansion of trade. And one thing that I don't think we mentioned is cooperation in the research and development sector. I mean, when we talk about US and when we talk about China, we are in quite a funny situation that suddenly China and US we put in one group with which Europe competes or India competes, and I feel very, very uneasy to put China and US in sort of one basket as the enemy or as anything. I mean, for me, that's always very different things. I mean, one is a democracy, the other is something else, and but when we put them in one basket and we see what is the difference, I mean, there are many differences, but one of the differences is very, very strong development both in US traditionally and in China relatively recently in the R&D sector. And in this new economy, technological revolution, without investing massively in research and development, from fundamental sciences to applied research, we don't have much chance. And I think it's very important, first, Europe and India to increase their spending on research and development, and second, to cooperate in research and development and to develop a strong cooperation agreements. And I would put here also UK and other European countries that are not members of the European Union, and also Australia, of course. So in a way that the research and development of the democratic world. I mean, it sounds a bit kind of pompous, but I think that is very important. It is an interesting fact that China is filing more domestically, more patents than EU, US, South Korea, and Japan put together. So this is what we are against in a way. So we have to put, and the green agenda, the net zero agenda, gives very good direction and opportunities for innovation, research, development, and so I just at the end want to add this point.
Thank you. And it's also kind of interesting that when you spoke about democracies, they were in a bracket, and it's EU and India and the other democratic world. It's amazing what a time to be alive in. But thank you for those points. If I can turn to Aruna ma'am, and one of the things that I had meant to ask and I didn't touch upon was on also the equation with BRICS, because one of the reasons for the backlash against India is also its being a part of BRICS. And maybe in your concluding remarks, ma'am, you could touch upon how that is going to play out in your view in terms of trade as well as green trade. You're on mute, ma'am.
Absolutely. If you look at the whole agenda, the center stage agenda in BRICS was to remove the dependence on the dollar as a trade and come up with a currency which is acceptable to the members of the BRICS. And they have expanded the zone of members before the initial 5 months, so that the trade agreement can be sort of in a different currency and not pitched against the dollar. However, India has been a bit reluctant on that point of view. I don't know whether it's the right way of going ahead with it. But then it is very important that India has to maintain its sovereignty in the trade. And what is most important is to make yourself strong. Today, why China is able to withstand this erratic behavior of US is what rightly has been said by Julian, of their strong manufacturing, research-based edge, what they're having everywhere. And nothing stops India from following that path. It may take a decade or so, but if we don't do it now, it is lost opportunity. Then you will be sandwiched between the world trade wars and sort of being hit from either sides depending on the advantage they want. So it is very important now to start focusing on it and leverage what advantages India may have in different sectors and lead it. Unfortunately, like if you look at in the IT sector also, where innovations were coming very beautifully, which were being used in the blockchain, because of not having any policy, you have hit the migrations. So the hub is moving to either Dubai or Singapore or Hong Kong from India. So that's a lost opportunity. Same is going to happen in metals. We don't have much scope on new research, but we have much scope on the process corrections. So that process correction in the metals is possible. In any manufacturing sector is possible. In agriculture, you have an edge. You're blessed by nature for producing a very high quality items where it's not able to replace for any other country. Your competitors cannot replace it. So you have that edge on it. So this is how we will have to proceed, whether it's in horticulture, agriculture, into your fisheries and other things. And definitely we have to focus on growing our domestic market. The demand in domestic market, which has been stagnant over the last couple of years, have to be triggered first, right? Then you are on a strong footing to argue into any erratic behavior of so-called trade leaders or trade dominators into this world. So it's very, very important now that you focus on strengthening the demand domestically and focusing on the research, because it's a preparedness of 10 years down the line. It's not like an immediate short-term problem we have to solve. And that is something we can sail through. Erratic behavior cannot be tolerated by the world for very long. Their own institutions are scuttling it down. So I think it will get eased and clarity will set in, because it's neither WTO compliant nor any of the agreements which has been there across the globe. So that is a pathway. You cannot keep on pushing this initiatives under the carpet and focus being diverted into irrelevant sectors or irrelevant topics. So it's high time we tighten our belt and have an introspection.
So back to the drawing board is your message throughout this. I guess for your concluding remarks also, my question still remains on how our equations with BRICS as well as BRICS nations and what our strategy will be or should be going forward.
It's a difficult question. I was thinking about this, but I could not have any clear answers. India is the chairman of BRICS this year. And BRICS nations, they feel India already is not participating in BRI led by China. India says it will not support de-dollarization. It will not support BRICS currency. So half the agenda, India is not following the BRICS. Now, US wants to punish India just by being a member of BRICS. And BRICS core members like China, they will feel that India is not enough into the BRICS. So India is like Trishanku. It's hanging. Both the sides, for and against of the BRICS, they are targeting India. And rightly so. India's position is not clear right now. I think the earlier India clarifies, the better for it. I don't have answer which way India should go right now.
Fair point. And I agree, it's a tough place to be in. But thank you for attempting. If I can then give Bentley the last word in this, as we say, Vidvana Sarvatra Pujyate, the scholar always has the last word in India. So if I can come to you, Bentley, and if you can give us your view on where you see things headed and what you expect in terms of how things will play out, especially in the entire global, the changing equations between nations.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you for the honor of being here with this group. Anybody is foolish to try to predict what's going to happen in the short term, right? What we're seeing right now with the punitive additional 25% tariff, it seems to me to be just an ego move by President Trump himself, right? That he is upset, particularly that his role in India, Pakistan, or his imagined role in India, Pakistan reconciliation was not recognized, and that this is punishment for it, right? What comes easily, what comes without any reason or logic can go away without any reason or logic, right? Or it could stay. It's really unclear what we're going to see between now and the August 27th deadline. And again, India has this disadvantage, right? Which is that it's not a huge trade partner, and the smartphones, which are the biggest import from India to the United States, are for now exempted until the Section 232 tariffs on semiconductors are settled. So it's really difficult to see what's going to happen in the near term. In the long term, as I said, I'm confident that this will increase the intensity of India's drive for energy security. And that if India can hitch that drive, if it can connect that drive to its industrial strategy in renewable energy technology, and things like biofuels and clean fertilizer and clean steel, then it will have more sovereignty, more geopolitical leverage, and a stronger economic base in these particular sectors of the economy. In terms of the broader global picture, everybody's going to be trying to do the same thing in a certain regard. And I think India does have opportunities with Europe, as we said, but also with Brazil. But again, there are strong political economy reasons why more cooperation with Brazil is going to be difficult. There's a reason why the relationship with Russia, between Russia and India, is quite solid, and that's because there are complementarities between the political economy of India and Russia, which are harder to align in the case of Brazil. Particularly pertaining to the agricultural sector and the way that both countries really protect their agricultural sectors, and want to continue to protect their agricultural sectors. And I think that gets to the thorny issues around RCEP and everything like that, right? That ultimately there's a political economy that India is trying to deliver. And unless it can have an effective industrial strategy that moves more of its economic value into these high technology, new clean energy zones, it's going to be pretty difficult for India to develop better relationships with other countries, right? So less of a prediction and more of a declaration of the structural situation, right? Which is that if India can manage to succeed in transitioning parts of its economy into these more high value add, high technology areas such as solar and clean steel, then that's actually going to make its ability to have stronger relationships with other countries easier. And so as other countries are looking for stronger partnerships, India can be a better partner, the more actually that it goes and invests in its own energy transition. And I think that's true for a lot of other countries at the same time right now, right? That they can give themselves more latitude and open themselves up to having better relationships with other countries, the more that they invest in their own geopolitical leverage and autonomy through energy security. And I think countries, not just like India, are seeing that. Ethiopia has a ban on internal combustion engines. Pakistan is importing record numbers of solar panels. They're now like the third largest importer of solar panels globally, which is kind of mind-boggling, just below China and the United States. So other countries are making major investments in energy security as well. And so I expect that that will have far-reaching geopolitical consequences, not just for India's relationship with the world, but for the way that we understand the way that the global economy works and the power of fossil fuels within that economy. So it's a difficult time to make predictions, but it's an exciting time to watch what plays out. And India, I think, has the cards. It has the ability to navigate these tensions really well, as long as it continues to double down on its energy security strategy.
Thank you for those wise words. And thank you to all of you actually for making the time and discussing this really difficult situation a little easier to understand for all of us, and for helping us see which is which way things can head. And it's anybody's guess. It's only appropriate that I must think of the Chinese, so-called Chinese curse, that we are living in interesting times. It's just fitting that since we're talking about who's the winner in this entire equation. But thanks again for making the time and speaking to us. And I hope that we will be able to continue this conversation very soon when we have a more clear picture a few days or weeks or months down the road. So looking forward to that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anama. Thank you, Adasa. Thanks, Betsy. Bye-bye.